see. Which finger? Thumb.
You do it. Can you look at me? Welcome everybody here to Basketball Passport. I am Anthony Irwin, joined on this fine Thursday afternoon by Leigh Ellis. Leigh, can you spin the basketball on your thumb? I've never even
Cannot
tried.
do it. Cannot do it, man. No. I'm one of those
guys. With
guys.
the middle finger. Like I have to go middle finger kind of,
Yeah.
But yeah, him going all fingers. He even did pinky at one point.
Yeah.
That was Luka Doncic wearing his Lakers uniform for the first time following one of the craziest, I think the craziest trade deadline deal in the history of the NBA. That was promptly followed up by a flurry of other moves over the last 24, 48 hours or so. And today on the show, we're going to be talking about as many of them as we can.
Yeah.
We'll talk about our winners, our losers. We'll talk about Jimmy Butler finally being gone from Miami and no longer having to care about that saga anymore. We'll talk about Kevin Durant not being traded by the Phoenix Suns and the implications thereof. We'll also talk about other players that we think maybe should have been traded. The buyout market is well underway as well. So we'll kind of explain some of the options there for the rest of the league and kind of try to, without getting too far into the weeds, explain what teams can and cannot do in this new CBA. And then now that all of this transaction stuff is basically behind us, we can look ahead to actual basketball and storylines that we'll be paying close attention to, whether it's on the court or, again, continuing implications from the outcomes of today. Plenty of stuff, packed show. We are not, because of everything that went down over the last few hours and certainly over the last 48 hours, we are not going to be traveling today. Our focus is going to be all NBA stuff today. So we'll travel to, I believe we are going to go to
Ljubljana. Yeah.
Ljubljana. That will happen the next time we get together or next week. We'll see. But Leigh, I'll go ahead and kind of get out of the way here. What would you say? Who do you think? Let's set the Lakers aside.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of unfair.
Yeah.
They had, I don't think, not just, I think, the best trade deadline in the NBA this season, but I think probably the greatest trade deadline that any team has ever had.
Yeah.
Most of the transactions where you get like the superstar and stuff like that, that usually takes place in the summer.
Yeah.
That normally doesn't take place here. So I think it's the best trade deadline ever. So let's go ahead, set them aside. They'll probably come up over the course of the show as well. But who outside of the Lakers would you say had the best trade deadline?
Well, I'm going to say De'Aaron Fox and the San Antonio Spurs. I thought that was the sort of deal that the Spurs were looking for. Fox wanted to go there. We weren't 100% sure if it was going to get done, but it did. And then I'm saying that as well because I was in Atlanta last night at the game for Fox's debut, and pretty smooth beginning for him. I mean, it did not look like that was the first time he'd played on that team. He finished around 24 and 13 and slotted in very, very nicely. Great game in the end. It looked like it was going to be a blowout there for a while. The Hawks came back, had a chance to maybe steal it. But Fox made a nice pass to Wembanyama, who got fouled, made one free throw, deliberately missed the second. The Hawks had no timeouts, and they won the game. But, that aside, I just think sometimes, and I went down to the pregame as well yesterday, and there was obviously a lot of media attention. And it was like, hey, listen, man, you wanted to come here. Does that put a lot of pressure on you, for one? And then for two, you're coming into a team halfway through the season. You've got no time here to adjust or acclimatize yourself to this team. You've got to get into it straight away. And I really liked his answer. He sort of said, look, most teams play a variation of the same style, the same plays. They're the same sets that they run. He said the only challenge really here is, and a lot of his teammates have found this in the past, is you've got to flip it when you have a lefty point guard versus a right-handed point guard. Most point guards are right-handed. So most of the plays in that sense really just have to be switched. So it takes a little bit of an adjustment there, but that's something he's worked on with obviously a ton of teammates over the years in the past. So he's kind of ready for it now. It's just his new young team that has to be the same. But again, I thought there last night, right from the start, I think it was pretty clear that the Spurs were like, listen, we want you to get a few buckets early on. We want you to just sort of get in, feel comfortable, and see how it goes, without really any expectations, but they get the win on top of that. So I give everyone in that deal, an A+, because you get the young guy who's going to be alongside Chris Paul for at least the remainder of this season. He's already talked about, what he's learning from Chris Paul. So I think you get a great teacher there in Paul. You get a student who's like really, really ready for a change. He's so excited to be playing with Victor Wembanyama that, no one obviously has them winning the championship this season. Certainly they want to make the play-in and then maybe the playoffs. But ultimately, if you're a San Antonio Spur, they gave up nothing virtually to get exactly the sort of player they wanted and who wanted to be there too.
Very importantly, De'Aaron Fox's wife is from the Texas area. I believe he's also from Texas.
He's from Houston. She's from San Antonio. But to that point, she did not want to go to Texas, he said, because...
Oh, really?
Well, he said because now all of a sudden the family's always on the doorstep. They're always around. And so, there's a little bit sort of too much sort of, like it's too easy to have family sort of on your doorstep all the time. Very interesting because that was addressed. And a lot of people make that automatic connection of like, well, you're going home, so it must be great. But his wife was actually more desired to stay away from that area. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, she's from San Antonio and he's from Houston.
Should I do the report? De'Aaron Fox unhappy in San Antonio. Happy life, buddy.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. I was going to say the opposite, that like, he would have a happy wife there being home. He's wearing her high school number as a tribute to her. He's doing everything he can to be like, honey, I swear it's going to be okay.
Yeah. See, that's why now he went down there and he was like, I'm going to San Antonio. This is great. We're going to Texas.
Babe, you realize I could play with Victor Wembanyama? And she's like, you realize how much I'm going to have to deal with your mom?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. She's just got the arms folded like, oh, I can't believe it. I can't believe we're going there,
Right. Awesome stuff. I agree with you. The Spurs had a great deadline. I thought it was really interestingly that they didn't get more involved in the Kevin Durant stuff.
Right.
Because they have the contracts to be able to do it. They really didn't give up any crazy draft capital to get Fox because he kind of forced his way to them.
Yeah.
I don't know how interested Kevin Durant would have been to go to San Antonio or to be on Wemby's team, right? He had that experience once being on another player's team, elected specifically not to go back to the Golden State Warriors, maybe in part because of that experience and how it played out. But I thought, like, you add Kevin Durant to that squad and basically just kind of take out Harrison Barnes hilariously again. Like that's an interesting core. I wonder if that's something that gets revisited again in the summer for San Antonio. They have a pretty brief window here before Wemby starts making real big time money and taking up a real big chunk of their cap. I kind of wonder if the time to strike is kind of now for them. I love that you mentioned Chris Paul mentoring De'Aaron Fox. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has spoken specifically about how Chris Paul taught him the game and how he doesn't necessarily think he would be where he is right now without playing with Chris Paul for that time. And I think it's an interesting thing there. Now, Stephon Castle, I think eventually should start over Chris Paul. I think he's a better player, and I think they'll probably want Paul's creation for the second unit. And I just don't really like De'Aaron Fox is a smaller guard and Chris Paul is a smaller guard. I don't really like the two guard combo there. When both of them are under like 6'3" or so, but it is still like, I thought the Spurs knocked it out of the park. The picks that they sent, or that were sent to Sacramento in this case, were a 2000 or a current top 14 protected pick for the Charlotte Hornets, who are going to be way under the 14 mark. So that pick won't convey. It'll turn into a second rounder. And then they sent over their own pick, which you now have De'Aaron Fox and Victor Wembanyama. That pick is probably not going to be very good. And then the other pick that they sent was a Minnesota pick from 2031 when Anthony Edwards, if he's still there, which maybe that's the gamble. But if Anthony Edwards is still in Minnesota in 2031, he'll be 28 years old and then the absolute peak of his powers. So not a ton that they got back. Sacramento did get back Zach LaVine, and they currently look like one of the weirdest rosters I've seen. They traded for Jonas Valanciunas. They still have Domas. Like, I just don't really see what they're trying to do. I was really kind of hoping they would get bigger on the perimeter, try to maybe send out DeMar DeRozan or maybe even trade Malik Monk to see what you can get and get some more defense on the perimeter there. They did not do that, and I
got bigger in the middle.
Yeah, I think they'll slip out of the playoff play-in picture.
Yeah, that was a weird deadline there because they got Valanciunas too from Washington. So now they got Valanciunas and Sabonis. I thought the same, that they might have been deciding, well, once Fox is gone, maybe they see what they can get for Sabonis as well and sort of hit the reset there. You know, obviously they fired Mike Brown as well, so it feels like they, you know, were heading in a different direction, but instead they don't do that. Instead, they sort of go and get stuck in that no man's land, the dreaded no man's land of Sacramento. Just quickly, I want to we got a comment here from Heel, who we were talking about De'Aaron Fox and his wife not wanting to be there. Well, Heel says, I planted drugs in my in-laws' car and called the police to try to get rid of them. Fox should take my route. Well, I'm not sure we need to go quite that far there, Heel, but...
I also don't think you should be admitting that in public.
But I wonder if it worked there for him. But yeah, I mean, the Kings getting Zach and DeRozan back together. Again, good. DeRozan, you know, great veteran, but it doesn't feel like that's the future there in Sacramento. So it feels like they're heading toward another rebuild at some point. And, you know, Chris Paul, it's an interesting one there with him too, because I agree they're a little undersized in the backcourt. And Chris Paul was at his absolute heel worst there last night, looking for like a breakaway call on the Hawks at one point when, there's nothing there. He's always pointing to the ref. He always wants the extra call. I mean, I think Chris Paul, for me, is probably the third best point guard that's ever played the game. Maybe fourth or fifth, but he's in that top bracket.
Annoying.
But the amount of times you want to just strangle him as well when you're watching him. You're like, at this stage of your career, how have you not sort of just gone, hey man, I'm bouncing around teams, I'm just going to let the refs do their job, like he's like that. But he hits some big shots. He's just so smart. He very rarely makes a bad decision with the ball. And if he's able to be a good mentor there for Fox, I can see him staying on for another season. I can see the Spurs saying to him like, hey, we can value what you bring in terms of a coach and mentor and all that. So I think it's good, but it's like, oh man. But seeing Wembanyama as well, he seemed very, very happy with the deal. Everyone did. The vibes around the Spurs were great. They played well. I mean, look, it was against Atlanta. Atlanta's going sort of in a bit of a different direction as well right now. But an ESPN game, the Hawks looked like they were about to get blown out, and they really fought back like they've been doing all season, and nearly stole it from them in the end there last night.
Let's see. My winner after San Antonio.
Go with a loser if you want.
Well, I mean, that one's pretty easy. The Dallas Mavericks. All right, if trading Luka Doncic wasn't bad enough, and I guess to that extent, like we could talk about like the Lakers. If Luka in and of himself wasn't enough to have a great deadline, they also turned around and traded for Mark Williams, who does have an injury concern, but now becomes that kind of perfect center that Luka gets to play together with, so long as both of them are healthy. But yeah, the Dallas Mavericks trade away Luka Doncic. Don't even negotiate. Like they have zero other negotiations. I guess there was a point where they called the Bucks about Giannis. I saw a report there, But nothing came out of that. So after that happened, they figured they were going to keep everything between the Lakers and them. They wind up not getting everything they possibly could from the Lakers, who wound up using the leftover assets that they got by not trading that stuff for Luka into Mark Williams. Then they trade Quentin Grimes and a second rounder to Philly for Caleb Martin, who I'm going to need more of an explanation from this. Mark Stein tweeted out 3 hours ago. Sources tell the Stein line that the full trade construction finalized today will send Caleb Martin in a 2030 second rounder to Dallas for Quentin Grimes in the 2025 second rounder going to Philly that the Sixers previously owned and which has been traded multiple times. And then he quote tweets himself with a specific timetable for Caleb Martin's Mavericks debut has not yet been established. League sources say Dallas does not have long-term concern about the right hip strain that has sidelined Martin, but a modification to the original trade was sought after the ex-Sixers physical. So he didn't pass his physical. Then just about 42 minutes ago, Mark tweeted out the Mavericks had the option to void the Caleb Martin trade. Sources tell the Stein line, but believe Martin can recover in a matter of weeks and went ahead with the deal with Philadelphia, agreed to put in the future second round pick. So that came after the fact. Originally, they weren't going to get a pick back. They wound up getting a pick for their trouble here because Caleb Martin is now potentially not available for a few weeks.
Yeah.
By the way, Lee, the Mavericks aren't in like some safe space in the standings. In the West, it's already precarious enough as it is.
Yeah.
But, the Mavericks are not, I don't even know if they're even if they are, they aren't very high up in the standings. So they are. The Mavericks sit 8th in the West. They are at 26 and 25. The Golden State Warriors, who currently sit 11th, are 25 and 25. And they play tonight against the Lakers, who will not have a whole bunch of their team. By the way, the 48 hours leading up to the trade deadline, we don't need to have games. Like, stop.
Right. Just let us fly. Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't mind it. I don't mind it because, like DeAndre Hunter, for example, last night, there was a real buzz around the arena that he was going to be traded. He played well, so I like that because it's like, man, is he really in trade talks if they're playing him on the night before the trade deadline? Yeah. And obviously he did get traded in the end. So you wonder how much of that was like, we're not that desperate to make a deal or whatever and make it happen. So I like it because you can take things out of, like, Kevin Durant didn't play against the Thunder. They ruled him out about 24 hours before that game for that exact reason. So it's like, it sounds like he's getting traded, and ultimately he could have gone to the Warriors if he chose, and he decided not to there. So I don't mind it. I think it's good. I mean, but I asked actually Coach Quinn Snyder about this before the game last night. I said, when you have a deal like the Luka and Anthony Davis one, does that sort of send a ripple effect through the locker room for the guys? Because they're like, that one came out of nowhere. So even for the guys who are not even in these rumors, like Bogdanovic hasn't played now for nearly 2 weeks. He got traded, of course. So it was like not a surprise that he got traded. But for the other guys, like, man, if they just dealt Luka and Anthony Davis like off the, out of nowhere, then anyone could be moved. And so he said that. He goes, guys kind of look over their shoulder a little bit that they know that it could happen without any warning in advance. And so I think everyone is just looking forward to that 3 p.m. deadline that we got to today, because it's like, okay, now at least I know what's happening. But I was following just online, because you know what it's like in the old days with Woj. There was always often a trade that would come through around 3:15 or 3:25 of one that was it was submitted before the deadline to the office, but they hadn't really released the details of it. So we got there, but yeah.
The Hunter, you want to talk about Hunter? Like,
sure.
I think it's a fascinating situation both in Atlanta and in Cleveland. Cleveland has been really bleeping good this year. They're 41-10. Their chemistry, they all say that chemistry has been a big part of this. but they unquestionably got better today. Karis
Yeah.
LeVert and George Niang,
Yep.
both. LeVert has been a bigger part of the rotation. Niang hasn't really been one. He's only been kind of a break glass in case of emergency kind of player. DeAndre Hunter has been really good for Atlanta this year. He's finally healthy. He's finally staying healthy. He has been excellent coming off of the bench.
Yeah.
I think it's a great trade talent-wise for Cleveland, but would you be nervous at all about messing with the chemistry there?
Not really, because what I've seen from DeAndre Hunter this season, he really has embraced that role as a six-man. Now, will he start in Cleveland? I'm not sure. They might have just say, listen, we want you in that second unit because he was really, really good at it. So you're not bringing a guy in who's like, I want to get my shots. I expect Garland, I expect Mitchell to find me early on and get my shots. I think the Cavs are more looking at a little bit of an insurance policy here of like, maybe we start him, but honestly, we could bring him off the bench because the guys they gave up, as you mentioned, they're Niang and LeVert. LeVert always feels like one of those guys who's a deadline deal day guy. He just seems to get traded. But the truth is as well, coming back, the Hawks actually now have too many players on their roster. So I wouldn't be surprised if one or both of those guys is actually, rerouted or waived or bought out or something like that anyway, because they have to trim their roster a bit there. But, Hunter, he sort of earned this opportunity to go to a team that's competing for a championship because he played really well in a secondary role, a role that he wasn't used to, and thrived in it. So that made him appealing to other teams. And I also think like with Bogdanovic, after a few years, if you're sort of not really going anywhere, you can't blame a guy for. He didn't. Not that I'm aware. Anyway, Hunter didn't ask to be traded. And again, he played last night, so he was doing all he could to win for the Hawks. But now he gets to go to a situation where it's a new team, a fresh start, and really does put himself in contention to contend for a championship this season. So good luck to him. He's a good defender too. He was guarding Wemby a lot there last night, and he's a tough defender. So these are the sorts of players I think actually are really important deals to make for teams that want to contend. So you bring in some more balance, some depth, some experience, some 3-point shooting, some defense, without really someone coming in thinking the team is going to now be adjusted around him. Instead, Hunter's like, yeah, just tell me where I need to slot in. And if they get the same Hunter that was averaging at one point nearly 20 a game off the bench for the Hawks, that's a really, really smart move by Cleveland to reinforce what they've got, give themselves another option on both ends who can contribute, and that's what you need to do. You don't need to make the big splashy move if you're already top of the East.
The Hawks, I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah,
because shortly after the trade deadline, Chris Haynes reported that Trae Young's future in Atlanta is now very much in question. They traded Bogdanovic, who you and I had spoken about previously. The Lakers were in on him. Obviously, once you trade for Luka Doncic, you don't really need Bogdan anymore. And then they also, like we mentioned a second ago, traded DeAndre Hunter. They don't have Jalen Johnson for the rest of the season. They didn't wind up getting involved in the Brandon Ingram, or they didn't trade for Brandon Ingram.
Yeah, they didn't get him, yeah.
Which I thought would have bridged the gap while Johnson was out and maybe kept them a little bit more competitive. The East is so bad that I don't think they'll fall completely out of the play-in game. I do think Philadelphia eventually passes them, as hopefully Joel Embiid starts playing a little bit more. Paul George maybe starts playing a little bit more. I think it's too big of a gap between the Hawks and the Nets. The Nets are currently at 17 and 34. So they have been playing a little bit better since D'Angelo Russell got there. And then after that, it's the Charlotte Hornets and Washington Wizards, who were both lottery bound. So I don't think Atlanta is at risk at falling out of the play-in. My question is like, should they, if you're going to move DeAndre Hunter, and you're already like, as it is with DeAndre Hunter in the 9 spot, you were kind of ahead of schedule anyway this year. You were supposed to be bad. Should they, I guess to an extent, it doesn't really do them any good to be bad because their pick goes to San Antonio anyway. But yeah, what do you do with what's going on in Atlanta?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're also in that sort of no man's land where, we've talked a lot. They beat Cleveland in Cleveland. They beat Boston twice in Boston. They beat the Knicks in New York, Milwaukee in Milwaukee. They beat the Lakers down here, but they lost twice to the Raptors down here. They lost to the Wizards down here. The Bulls beat them easily. So there are times this season where I've looked at the Hawks and thought, I tell you, if things break right for them and they get healthy in the playoffs, they could honestly make the Eastern Conference Finals. But as it sits now, I'm like, they could face the Bulls in that first playing game at home, and you wouldn't feel all that confident that they would win that game, because they've been very, very ordinary at times. One thing I will say, I think Quinn, for the most part, has them competing, but they are lacking that punch that they need. Mm-hmm. And Trae Young, I mean, I saw what Chris Haynes said there about him, and I'll say Trae Young has been a really solid professional this season. He hasn't been pouting in the locker room or anything like that. He's really changed and adjusted his role. He's leading the league still in assists. He's hit some huge shots, some game winners for this team against the Pistons, against the Lakers, against the Jazz. He nearly had another one last night against the Spurs. So he's really stood up and given everything he's got. And now it's like you're sort of still just treading water. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does get moved in the offseason. I think they probably took a few calls on him over these last few days and week or so, but they weren't going to just give him up for pennies on the dollar. They need to get some value back there, and they need to sort of choose a direction as well. It's like, okay, you've got Reece Shea, Jalen Johnson, Dyson Daniels. Are those the guys you're moving forward? Then okay, you need to choose that direction. Clint Capella didn't get traded. That seemed like he was going to get traded. He hasn't played now also for a week. So the Hawks have got some things to figure out here. They get Bones Highland and Terrence Mann from the Clippers for Bogdanovic. But again, as I mentioned with the Cavs, there's too many guys right now, so they won't all be on the Hawks roster by the end of the day. In fact, none of them may be. I mean, who knows exactly what they're going to do here, but. It's a tough situation there for Atlanta because they are better than a lot of those teams at the bottom in the East, but they can't really also they couldn't go ahead with what they had. They did need to make a change, and Bogey obviously didn't want to be there anymore. He hadn't played for nearly 2 weeks. And I think the DeAndre Hunter deal, they just looked at that as maybe, getting some assets and getting some more draft capital to use going forward in other deals in the summer.
Yeah, Capella and Hunter both had like we kind of saw this all over the league. Those guys who make like 20-ish million bucks became really difficult to trade for because so many, like it used to be a $20 million contract.
Yeah.
Was pretty easy to get to because most teams had, fat on their roster salary wise. Under this new CBA, there just is not very much fat on rosters anymore. And that 20, like Lonzo Ball comes to mind. The Lakers like Lonzo. They considered it, but he makes $23 million. And if they would have gone for him, it would have taken Rui and stuff, or it would have taken Gabe and more stuff to get there. Yeah. And that's just, it's hard to move rotation type players for, players who have that kind of an injury history. And then like DeAndre Hunter has his injury history. Clint Capella has some too. Like all of those players in that $20 million range or so, it was kind of difficult for teams to kind of get up to that number now. And I'm really kind of curious. I think right now a lot of the instability has a lot to do with the fact that like teams, like rosters right now were built for the previous CBA and now don't work in the new CBA. So maybe eventually everything will kind of stabilize as more teams are built for the new CBA. But there's a good comment here from Heel, who I hope isn't being looked for by the police. But he writes, these NBA salary aprons were designed to level the playing field. With Towns going to New York and now Luka going to LA, big markets have won. Have these aprons failed? Well, here's how I would put it, Leigh, and here's my theory. I'll run it by you. When you try to level the playing field, you make it harder for everybody, but it's always going to be inherently easier on larger markets. And so the harder and harder and harder you make it, those larger markets are technically probably going to increase the gap between how much easier it is for them to do stuff and those teams that now have to navigate this new CBA. So, like I've always said, you can't legislate parity. Parity is a kind of thing that kind of just happens or doesn't. Look, there are 5 players on a court in basketball. That means one guy is going to have more impact on a basketball game than one guy in basically any other sport. And it's really difficult, if not impossible, to legislate parity with that being the case, especially when you have the differences in markets and what players prioritize.
Well, I also think it's not really a hard cap. It's a soft cap with so many different ways you can get around it. And I think if you do want to have a hard cap, then make it a hard cap, and you can't go into tax territory. You can't make these trades that do put you in different aprons in different areas. Like, make it a lot more strict so that you don't have so many different variables in play. It's like, hey, this contract's going to put us over the cap. We can't make that deal. Okay.
Yeah.
Rather than, again, like you see all these second round picks and cash and all this stuff being sent. Again, there are people that cap geeks love it, like they can go right into all that stuff. For me as a fan, I find those things difficult to explain because I don't fully understand them myself. Like, why are you trading a protected second round pick, protected through 55? I mean, I don't understand how that helps anybody. You know what I mean? Like, nobody really knows, and they just get thrown around into deals to make them happen. So I would actually, if I was the league, I would say, okay, let's experiment then with a way harder cap that you cannot really exceed no matter what. And if
they're on their way there, the second apron is basically functioning that way.
Yeah,
because teams do not want to mess with it, but they're on their way.
I mean, then there's the repeater taxes and things like that. But ultimately, I mean, the salary cap gymnastics that the Knicks had to do to get Towns to New York. I mean, it was a great write-up. I can't remember who it was by, but it basically took them a couple of years to sort of prepare for that, and they nailed it there. And so, I mean, big markets are always going to have an advantage because they've got deeper pockets and they can absorb the losses. But that also, as we've seen, and as you know, as a Lakers fan, doesn't mean that they're always prepared to go into that extra, into those extra luxury tax areas and pay it out. And so they instead, try to still trim around the edges and make everything fit, because nobody wants to just give away tens of millions of dollars in taxes.
Well, the Cavs, part of the reason that they made their trade, they're in the middle of a title pursuit. They're in the middle of like, they are 40-11. They got better basketball wise, so I'm able to kind of give them some leeway here. But people were like, look at that, they slipped under the luxury tax. I'm like, why does anybody care? That's just the billionaires' money. Like, I don't care. I give two rat's asses. If the guy who owns what's the mortgage loans company, Dan Gilbert.
Dan Gilbert.
I don't care if Dan Gilbert makes more money. That is the least thing that I care about. Why is that being reported on?
Yeah, I know. A guy who's made billions, he's got a franchise worth billions. It's like, oh, he saved $2 million in the. I'm like, who gives a shit? Like, I mean,
I do not care.
I couldn't care less who owns the teams. Like nobody ever turns up because they're like, oh man, I can't wait to see the owner tonight. You want to see the players.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a wild image. Shams just retweeted it. It's from SportsCenter. This is a crazy image that puts into context how many players were just moved. Look at this.
Yeah.
From left to right on the top, you have Mark Williams, Chris Middleton, De'Aaron Fox, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Terrence Mann, DeAndre Hunter, Zach LaVine, Brandon Ingram, Anthony Davis, Dennis Schroeder, Karis LeVert, Jonas Valanciunas, Jimmy Butler, Luka Doncic, Kyle Kuzma, Andrew Wiggins. You have Dalton Connect there and Marcus Smart, and that's not everybody. That's.
Where's Bonesy? Get Bones Highland in there. And how come Dennis Schroeder's only in there once? Where's PJ Tucker? He got traded like 4 times. Man,
that would have been great if they littered him through the graphic. It's like multiple PJ Tuckers.
Schroeder
would have been awesome.
Schroeder started last night apparently warming up for the Warriors. and got
Got
told,
traded to
okay,
the Jazz.
you're going to the Jazz, and now he's on the Pistons. And he was the guy who got traded earlier in the season and then said, oh man, this deadline, it's like you're a slave. And then they've just shipped him all over the place. So yeah, crazy stuff. But PJ Tucker, I mean, man, where did he end up? Is he on the Raptors? Because he went to the Heat.
Yes.
And he went
yes.
to
Yes. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think he is.
Yeah.
He was with the Heat, and then I think he got sent to the Raptors. What do you think about the Raptors trading for Brandon Ingram?
Yeah, interesting move because he's a free agent at the end of this season. I mean, the Raptors had Siakam and OG and traded those guys away for not much in return. If you gave me the choice, would you rather Siakam or Ingram? I would take Siakam in a heartbeat. So I'm not exactly sure. I think Brandon Ingram's a good scorer. He's evolved his game, but he tends to be injured a lot. And I mean, is he a good fit next to Scotty Barnes? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how he sort of slots in there. So I don't know if this is a long-term play here for the Raptors, or if it's, they gave up Olynyk and who else was in that deal going back there for the Raptors? I know it was Olynyk and someone else, but I don't know. Does it really move the needle all that much for the Raptors? I thought they were, as he's a little bit older as well. I thought they were trying to go younger and rebuild, around Scotty Barnes, and I'm not sure he's a great fit there. Could be proven wrong, and maybe they do work together, as a tandem. But Ingram, if he stays healthy, I mean, he was really good for the Pelicans in those playoffs a couple of years ago against the. Oh man, it's escaped me now. But that's the thing; it just feels like it's been so long since we've seen him. But a good scorer. Just not sure if that's the right team for him and right situation.
I saw a stat, and I'm sorry I didn't grab who tweeted this out, but I think this is the fourth straight player who is on an expiring contract that the Raptors used a first rounder to get.
Yeah.
That's pretty rudderless. Masai Ujiri, widely considered one of the better GMs in the sport. Normally really has his stuff together, built that championship team there in Toronto with Kawhi Leonard on it. They've been kind of all over the place ever since.
Yeah.
And I think they're another team that, we see this a lot. Like we just mentioned owners and stuff a second ago, the Chicago Bulls, the Atlanta Hawks, the Toronto Raptors, the Indiana Pacers, and I can go down the lines of a bunch of owners who are a lot more focused on the bottom line than actually winning championships.
Yeah.
And you have these situations where they would much rather make it to the playoffs, get some playoff revenue, and get the revenue that you get from the games that you win en route to that playoff appearance. They would much rather have that go in their way than bottom out, get the kind of high level talent that you need to win championships and actually really compete for it. Or you have cases where you are competing for it and you still duck the luxury tax, like we talked about a second ago. I think that's where Toronto is at. Chicago has basically been there ever since Michael Jordan. All of these owners need to get out of the way at a certain point and let these markets experience a freaking championship. Just try it.
Speaking of the Bulls, I ran into Steph No and Trey Kirby, my old friend Trey Kirby, last night at the Raptors at the Hawks Spurs game. A couple of Bulls fans right there who were disgruntled.
Me a second ago, as a Bulls fan living in Atlanta, I know way too much about the 9-10 game in the East.
Yeah. So it was great to see them. Trey was. He just you could just tell, you could hear it in the voice, the resignation in his voice, that they're just the wheels are just spinning. Trade Vooch, he wanted Vooch out of there, but one of the big names actually surprised. There was no even real links to anyone there with Vooch that I saw. Name
Golden
didn't really come up. Yeah, well, a little bit, yeah, but and the Hawks were even sort of somewhat connected to him. But if it was like him for Capella, it was like, all right, what's the point? But yeah, it's always fun. It's always fun when you see the guys who have just seen their team do the same thing over and over and over again. And I mean, that's the thing with the Reinsdorfs. I mean,
Yeah.
living off the Jordan years for the rest of their existence, really.
Yeah. Well, they announced, remember earlier this year, they made a big deal about the fact that they are going to announce Derrick Rose's retirement. Not that they retired it, nothing like that. But they're like, we're going to have a whole bunch of Derrick Rose content, to make you guys think of the good old days, which again, they didn't win a championship during those good old days.
Yeah.
Those are the fan bases that I really feel for. Like, think about poor Bulls fans. You're in a giant market. Reinsdorf is making money hand over fist off of that team and the merchandise and all that stuff. And they finally fire Garpax. They finally gone. They bring in Arturas Karnisovas, who winds up being a worse version of Garpax. And what it winds up being, I tell this to Lakers Lounge listeners all the time, and I've said it for years now. When you see these franchises that are stuck in neutral, the way that the Chicago Bulls are and those other teams that I kind of mentioned, other people wind up getting blamed, but that's an ownership thing.
Yeah,
you can change the deck chairs and who's picking the deck chairs and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, the person who is steering the ship and making sure that the ship just stays going in the same direction forever, that's ownership.
Yeah, I think John Paxson is still unofficially involved, though. I think
that's true.
I think Reinsdorf just said, "All right, I'll save you some of the heat here. I'll remove you from any official title." But I think he still is behind the scenes.
Yeah,
he hit the game winner against the Suns. I think he said, "Man, you'll have a job here for life." That's and he had some big moments. He hit the big threes and the big shots against the Lakers in Game 5 as well in '91. So I think John Paxson has earned his lifetime achievement award there with the Bulls and the Reinsdorf family.
Any other stuff that came out of trade deadline? You want to move on to buyouts?
Well, only that KD and the Suns there didn't do anything major in terms. I know Nurkic got dealt in the end, but Beal, Booker, and Durant go forward there with Phoenix. Very strange, sort of about 24 to 36 hours ago, when it's really seemed like Kevin Durant was going to be traded to the Golden State Warriors before he torpedoed that deal apparently and said, no, I'm not going there. And it was reported that the Suns were entertaining trade offers for him. So I would like to know the other ones. I'm guessing the Heat were involved in that as well, to sort of see if he wanted to go down there to Miami. It didn't work out for whatever reason. But it really felt strange that the Suns have all three of those guys still on the roster, because I was certain that Beal or Durant wouldn't be there. I mean, Booker didn't really think they were going to move him.
No.
But it certainly seemed like KD was, KD or Beal was going to go, and Jimmy Butler was going to come back the other way, or again a variation of that deal with the Warriors. So we'll see what happens there with the Phoenix Suns from now on, because when you've kind of flirted with the idea of trading KD, you basically send him to the Warriors if he wanted to go, and he's not. It's like, all right, well, I guess we're just going ahead with what we've got for the remainder of this season. But what started off as a really good season in Phoenix, injuries played a role in that, but they've also, the wheels have come off a bit there, and it feels like there'll be a fairly significant blow up in the summer there of some of their guys, and we'll see what happens. But KD, it would have been crazy if KD got traded again. He's one of those guys that I put in that super elite category, but he ultimately could have been on his fifth team.
Kind of
so
Shaq.
Yeah, exactly. Like Shaq at the end there, where it was like he just sort of bounced around from team to
He's
team.
way better than Shaq was when he started bouncing around.
Yeah.
He's still an excellent player, but yeah, some stuff in common there. remember when Steph Curry and the rest of the stars around the league were like, man, no stars are safe. Basically nobody. Only like 3 guys get to go to bed every night and know that they aren't going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, man, that is a really profound statement. But then I also kind of looked at it, I was like, Bradley Beal's one of those guys. How did we arrive here?
Yeah.
Because he has that no trade clause, grew less and less inclined to waive it, and here they are.
Yeah, I look, he got the big fat contract from the Wizards. They had to do it. He got the no waive, no trade clause thrown in there. He got to go to Phoenix, and then he sort of controlled how things played out there. So, great business move by him. Really good business move by him. But
his agent is a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. But it's one of those things like, how did that happen? Really? So.
Yeah. All right. Let's really quickly look at, I think the one big buyout story to keep an eye on is Ben Simmons. He has actually been rather good for Brooklyn this year. Hasn't been a meme, which I think is a win for him in a season. And he apparently is talking buyout. So quick, backstory on this. I've spoken to agents and stuff like that and asked basically, after how it played out last year for guys like Gary Trent Jr. and guys like Tyus Jones, who got the veteran minimum after being, some really popular free agent options for a lot of teams. They wind up having to take the minimum. Gary Trent Jr. actually opted out of a more fruitful contract to wind up on the veteran minimum contract. I was told that money is going to be very difficult. It was difficult to come by last year. And I think that's going to remain the case. So this buyout season, basically, if you make more than that $12.8 million, because your market is suppressed by the CBA, only so many teams can actually go out and sign you so long as they're under the first apron. I've been told that there are a lot of agents and advisors who are telling their guys, stay put unless you find the absolutely right spot.
Yeah.
You're probably better just kind of staying put. In this case, Ben Simmons makes $40 million. And when you get bought out and you sign what is the, essentially becomes a prorated veteran minimum contract, that's kind of what you get seen as for the rest of your career, unless you prove otherwise. And I'm really kind of curious that Simmons would pursue this. What do you think of that as a possibility?
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised he didn't get traded for the reason that I think teams are like, we're not giving up a single asset for him. We'll take our chances if he does get waived or bought out or whatever. And, he's played himself out of a big contract. I don't think he's going to get anything ever more than a 1-year deal. Maybe a 2 with a team option or something like that. But I mean, the incredible talent that he has, and at times I've seen, watched quite a few Nets games this year, and when he's playing and he's at full speed and he's running the floor, he's got incredible court vision, the ability to make incredible passes. So there is some talent there. It's just there's just no way any team would want to invest anything significant of value to get him. It's more like we'll take him if he's available, but nothing. There's no real asset there for us to concede. And so, he really has only got himself to blame as well. I know things weren't great for him in Philadelphia, but the way that he reacted to that didn't help. And the fact that he was unable to ever sort of accept what happened there in Game 7 against the Hawks and take the blame for it really has derailed his career. I mean, a phenomenal talent, one of those guys who was the number 1 pick, a year or two before the draft. Missed his first season because of injury, but then came back, rookie of the year, basically nearly averaged a triple-double. But it's funny, the competitiveness wasn't there. And now he's sort of paying the price of that. So he's going to have more money than he's ever going to need in his life. He's already made his money. But ultimately now it's more just like he's such a high risk of you just don't know what you're going to get. The shot has never come close. I mean, the shot even now it's terrible, the shot. So that's going to hold him back, and that's holding him back. It's been the case for the last 3 or 4 years now, and the fact that he's shown a reluctance to really improve that is going to cost him financially. I know when he was in Brooklyn just after the trade, someone I know up there said they were shocked at sort of how lackadaisical he was at, even like after what happened in Philadelphia, the Nets thought they were getting a guy who was like, right, I'm going to show them what they gave up. And it was more kind of like, yeah, let's play. I'm not, there was no real fire, there was no spark, there was no motivation there to get revenge on anyone. Instead, it was more just, he was just happy to be out of Philadelphia, and that was it. But there wasn't the motivation to really cement himself as an all-star player, as an all NBA player, an all defense player, or anything like that. His attitude was very, very mundane.
Yeah, he had a podcast appearance earlier this year that was pretty enlightening. That I am obviously bummed by how his career has gone. He does, like you said, have a lot of himself to blame for how it has gone. Not the best habits away from the court, not always the most focused on basketball, and improving in basketball. Otherwise, he would have improved a little bit more. I do wonder if him taking this buyout and wanting to get to a winner might signal that he's maybe maturing a little bit. I'm hoping so. I'm hoping that he gets to the right spot and he kind of figures it out, because when he was right, he was a really fun talent.
Oh, no question.
Average triple-double, like overwhelming athleticism, really good basketball IQ, like as a passer and all that stuff.
Yeah.
He just, never really improved.
There are flashes of that still. I've posted a couple of plays of his throughout, more at the start of the season, where when he just plays on instinct and doesn't think about it, he goes downhill with the ball, and he can fire these passes into the corner. He's got great court vision, really high basketball IQ in terms of passing the ball. But it's like when it's his chance to shoot, it's like he's never shot the ball, and that's the part that really frustrates me, because I look at guys like Tony Parker, Derrick Rose as an example, even Chris Paul. These guys couldn't shoot in their first couple of seasons, but what they did was worked tirelessly to get to become reliable. Even if you don't all have to become Steph Curry, but Tony Parker especially, he's probably one of my favorite stories, because the Spurs gave up on him to the extent where they tried to sign Jason Kidd. They couldn't get that deal done, and so they went ahead with Parker, and then Parker became a Hall of Famer himself. So, that to me is what it comes down to, is like, you've got to put in the work, and Simmons has shown, it's been nearly 10 years in the NBA, that he doesn't have that work ethic, because we can see the results out on the court.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Anything else that you're keeping an eye on for the rest of the season? Just sort of, I guess, what happens here, mainly with the Hawks, how they go forward. I hope my man Bogdanovic can find something out there in Los Angeles, because it was kind of a disappointing end here to his career in Atlanta. He was great a couple of times, Bogey. He was really, really fun to watch. Great guy to cover. I'm going to miss him a lot from that perspective. And he hit some big shots here for Atlanta over the years, but this season he just could not get it going, and the shot wasn't falling, the numbers were down, the production was down. And so I hope a fresh start in Los Angeles, a team that's very likely to make the playoffs, he can just find it again. That would be so cool, because if that's the case, then the Clippers got a steal here for him. But if he's not able to really find it, and he's had a couple of weeks off, so hopefully as well the body could have used that rest to get himself right again, because I think that's one of the biggest problems. He just hasn't been healthy all season. Hopefully he's fresh, he's ready, he's in a new situation, and he's on a winner, and we can see some classic Bogey again, because he's one of my favorite guys to watch, and I'm going to miss him here in Atlanta. Yeah, the thing I'm kind of keeping an eye on here is I think the Lakers might have a potential champion on their hand. It's going to be tough. OKC is really tough. They get Chet back, and they were overwhelming when they had Chet there. They still haven't, to this point, had both Chet and iHeart together at the same time.
Yeah.
So they're going to be a tough out. The Denver Nuggets not doing anything stood out to me here. Like,
yep.
Why? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that they're always, I think, going to be the Lakers' bugaboo, but Luka and LeBron in a playoff series is something exactly zero teams will want to see, I think, come the postseason here.
Do we have
we'll see how it turns out.
When's Luka expected to?
Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday, right? Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I tell you, if that, he's obviously got to come back and get himself sort of in shape a little bit here too. But if he stays healthy for the rest of the season, man, like it's going to be wild to watch.
My favorite take so far has been people, and that's like smart people giving the take, but they're like, yeah, I don't know how Luka and LeBron are going to play together. And I'm like, two like otherworldly basketball minds who are also inherently unselfish on the basketball court aren't going to be able to figure this out. I think they'll be okay. I think they'll be
okay. Yeah. I mean, maybe not from night one, but I think ultimately it will be the case there for sure. So,
yep.
Yeah.
All right. That is going to do it here for this episode of the Basketball Passport Podcast. We will go ahead and get back to our usual activities on Sunday, and then I think Thursday we'll make the trip that we were supposed to make today. And yeah, fascinating times ahead. We get now to this is kind of my favorite time of the year. I know some people kind of lose a little bit of interest in this downtime between now and say April, or because there isn't as much trade noise, there isn't as much transaction noise. The focus is more on basketball. You have teams that are kind of just trying to get and stay healthy for the playoffs. This is kind of my favorite time of the year in the NBA. It's really time to see what these teams finally look like and see who looks like what when the games really, really start to matter. So looking forward to Sunday. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week and weekend, and we'll talk to you guys then. Safe travels, everybody.